This is OpenSUSE Leap 15 with KDE Plasma version 5.12.5 and Linux kernel version 4.12.14. If, like me, you're wondering about the numbering of this version, the previous version of OpenSUSE Leap was 42.3, but it's being reconciled with the equivalent version of SUSE Linux Enterprise, which is now at version 15 also, and OpenSUSE Leap shares the core system developed for SUSE Linux Enterprise, and it has additional software provided by the OpenSUSE community. That's also the reason the kernel version is a little bit old, 4.12.14. Currently, my installation of Fedora 28 is using 4.16.8. But the Leap developers point out that this kernel version is updated with security updates and bug fixes, also with some advances in hardware. However, if your hardware is so new that this kernel version doesn't work with it, you may be able to obtain a newer kernel. Leap 15 is targeted at the professional market, and some of its new features would be of little interest to the average user. However, it can still be used by the average user. I have this installed on an external hard drive. There are a few new download options. First, go to opensuse.org and then click on Leap. And then click on Install Leap. And you get OpenSUSE Leap 15. It's a little hard to see these tabs, but there's two tabs up here. This one on the left is for the installation-only versions. And you have the usual large DVD image, 4.7 gigabytes, which gives you an option of installing several different desktops, which you can choose during the installation. However, there is no live image. And then also under installation, you have the network image, which is really small, only 120 megabytes. And everything's installed over the internet. Of course, you have to have a good internet connection to use this. Now then, the other tab is the live versions, and these are new. You now have the option of a live disk image for two desktops. One is GNOME 3, and I believe it's 3.26, and the other is KDE Plasma 5.12. I chose to download the KDE Plasma 5.12 version. However, this is also a net install version. In other words, that 950 megabytes gives you your live disk image, but it doesn't give you all of the software that's going to be installed. You'll need a good internet connection to download the rest of the software while you're installing it. Now I'm going to switch to a virtual machine and show the installation. Press Enter to go to the OpenSUSE live session. I didn't run into this problem while installing to an external drive, but I'm being asked to log in, and the normal way to get to a graphical user interface is to type startx, but to run startx you need to have permission, so I'm going to log in as root. Tells me to have fun. Now I'm going to type startx. And now I'm in the live session. Now this shows that I have a wired connection. Actually, I don't. I have a Wi-Fi connection, but since this is a virtual machine, it reads it as a wired connection. Normally, I would go down here to the network manager and connect to my Wi-Fi. But that's not an option here, so I'll just skip that. Then I'll double click on installation. Now here it shows the Ethernet controller because it's reading my Wi-Fi as Ethernet through the virtual machine. I'm just going to click on Next. Please select the system role. I'm going to choose desktop with KDE Plasma. This is what OpenSUSE wants to do. It wants to create a GPT file system as opposed to an MS-DOS file system on my virtual hard disk. It wants to create an 8 megabyte partition as the BIOS boot partition, which is required if you have a GPT file system. It wants to create a 17 gigabyte partition mounted at root with the ButterFS file system. It wants to create an 11 gigabyte partition mounted at home with the XFS file system. And it wants to create a 2 gigabyte swap partition. I don't want to do any of those things. I could just accept this, but just to show you how you can change these things, if you want to, I'm going to go to Expert Partitioner, and I could start with current proposal or start with existing partitions. I'm going to start with existing partitions. Now I'm going to go down here to my virtual box. And we're going to go down here to Expert and create a new partition table. and it's defaulting to GPT. I do not want a GPT partition table. I want an MS-DOS partition table. Click on Next. Yes. Right, now I'm going to add a primary partition. Next. Maximum size is 30.45 gigabytes. I'm going to click on custom size and make that about 28 gigabytes. Click on Next. I'm going to make that the operating system. Click on Next. Now it still wants to make this ButterFS. I'm going to use the drop-down menu and make this ext4. And I'm going to mount the device at root. Click on Next. Now I'm going to add another partition, primary partition. Next. I'm going to use the rest of the space, 2.45 gigabytes. Click on Next. And I'm going to make that the swap partition. Click on Next. That's what I want to do. Click on Next. Now I'm going to accept what I've done. This creates an MS-DOS partition table on my virtual hard disk, creates a root partition formatted as ext4 mounted at /root, and it creates a swap partition. Click on Next. Now, even though I'm connected to the internet, it has not guessed my time zone. I'm going to click on Chicago and then click on Next. My full name, XRAM Tech. Username, it creates one for me, XRAM Tech in lowercase letters. Password. Password. Use this password for system administrator automatic login. I'm going to uncheck that. And then click on Next. Now, bootloader type grub2, enable trusted boot, no, status location, puts it on the master boot record of my virtual disk. I don't want to change the location. Install boot code into MBR. Do not install boot code into a partition with /boot. That's right. Now it's going to install OpenSUSE Leap 15 with the KDE Plasma desktop base system, enhanced base system, app armor, KDE Plasma 5 desktop environment, laptop, yes, system administration, software management, multimedia, office software, fonts, X Windows system, graphics, games. Size of packages to install 5 gigabytes, downloading from remote repositories 1.5 gigabytes. Default systemd target graphical mode. See what's down below there. Firewall will be enabled, SSH server will be disabled, SSH port will be blocked. Good. Install. Now information required for the base installation is now complete. So I'm going to click on Install. Now this is going to take a long time. It's got 4,931 gigabytes, 2,282 packages remaining. So I'm going to end this demonstration of the installation here. The rest is just a lot of downloading, maybe for hours, in a virtual machine with simple screen recorder going. And then, of course, you have to restart to boot into the new system. Now we're back in my actual installation on an external hard drive. This is pretty much the way it came. I've changed the theme a little bit. I don't want to go into that in detail because you could literally spend hours, if not days, theming the KDE Plasma desktop. First of all, it comes with the application menu as the standard menu. This is the one I like best. It has a search function. Otherwise, it's a cascading menu. It's fairly easy and intuitive to use. You also have the usual options. If you right-click on this symbol and then left-click on Alternatives, you have the application dashboard. Click on Switch. That's this one. And you have the application launcher. That's this one. This is the traditional KDE Plasma menu. I don't particularly like it. The reason is, if I go to Applications and say go to Office, I now have to navigate back to all applications again. It's an extra step. I just don't care for it. So I'm glad they chose the application menu as a default. Just to go through this briefly, under Education you have Science, and under that you have one thing, which is KDE Marble, and that's a global map. Under games, you have three categories: board games, you have Mahjong and K-Reversi, card games, K-Patience, logic games, K-Minds, and K-Sudoku. Under graphics, you have Digicam, you have GIMP, and this is GIMP 2.8. It's not quite the latest one, but it's the latest one that most distributions have. I have version 2.10 on my installation of Manjaro. You have GwenView, which is an image viewer, the Huygens batch processor for batch processing images. You have the Huygens Calibrate Lens, the Huygens Panorama Creator. One thing that GIMP doesn't have is a panorama function. You have LibreOffice Draw, Ocular, which is a PDF viewer, Show Photo, and Scanlight, which is a scanning utility. Under Internet, you have Aggregator, which is an RSS client. I added Falcon, which is the Qt-based web browser, and I want to go into that in a minute. It came with Firefox, and this is version 60.1, I believe. Came with Kmail, KNetAttach, Conversation, KTNF, which is a file viewer, Mutt, the PIM Setting Explorer, Sieve Editor, and Tiger VNC Viewer. Now, I want to go back to Falcon for a minute. This is why I like Falcon. Let me just go to the news. Now I want to open a new tab, so I click on plus. And you notice it opens the new tab on my search page, which I've chosen as my home page. The reason I like to do that is on the search page you have access to this Google Apps array here, and I use this to quickly switch between YouTube, the news, Maps, Translate, Gmail, etc. Now on Falcon you can set that by clicking on the main menu, clicking on Preferences, and under General, it says on a new tab, Open Home Page. You could also open a blank tab, open Speed Dial, and open another page. But I like that option of opening my home page. Now in Firefox, if you open a new tab, you get this hodgepodge page in which they try to tell you what you want to look at. It's almost never what I want to look at. And it does not have the Google App Array. So to get that, I have to then click on Home, and I've set the Google search page as one of my home pages. And then I can get to the app array here. So it's an extra step that is totally unneeded. And if you look under Preferences in Firefox, there doesn't seem to be any way of setting the tab to go to your home page. So that's why I like Falcon better than Firefox. By the way, in both Falcon and Firefox, you won't be able to play any YouTube videos as OpenSUSE comes by default. You have to first install some restricted codecs, and I did that with the one-click install process, which I'll show you in a minute. Under Multimedia, you have the Dragon Player K3B, which is a disk burner, Kdenlive, which I installed, and it's version 18.04.1. Notice there's a missing package here and a missing application. I'm going to have to install those to use Kdenlive, but I haven't done it yet. I also installed MuseScore 2.1 just to see if I could get it. And to get that, I again had to go to the one-click install, but that was quite easy. I installed Simple Screen Recorder from the repository, and I installed VLC Media Player with the one-click install process. Again, it was not in the repositories, and in getting VLC Media Player, I also got the Pac-Man repositories and all sorts of restricted codecs. I want to mention one more thing. When I installed Kdenlive, I first installed it using Discover, and that's a highly graphical software manager, and I'll go into that in a minute. But it did not install. It said it was installing, but it did not install. To actually install Kdenlive, I had to use the YAST2 software manager, and that worked. So there are still a few glitches with Plasma 5.12. So in Office, it comes with K-Addressbook, K-Mail, Contact, K-Organizer, KTNF again, the LibreOffice Base, LibreOffice Calc, LibreOffice Draw, LibreOffice Impress, the LibreOffice Meta Package, and LibreOffice Writer. In other words, it includes the entire LibreOffice suite. Ocular, PDF Viewer, PIM Setting Explorer, Sieve Editor. A lot of these are duplications. Under Settings, there's Configure Desktop, ICT Web Control Panel, ICT Web Policy Editor, Qt4 Settings, the Wacom Tablet Finder. I don't have a Wacom tablet. And YAST. Now, at the top here, you have Configure Desktop, and those are the KDE settings. And at the bottom here, you have YAST, and those are the OpenSUSE settings. I'll go into those in a minute. Under System, you have the Archive Manager, Discover, the software manager, which I mentioned, I'll go into, Dolphin File Manager, and now you have File Manager in the super user mode, which is helpful. You have the Info Center, which I showed you earlier, Install and Remove Software, and this is with the YAST software manager. KNet Attach, Console, which is one version of the terminal. KSysGuard, which is the resources and task list. K-Wallet Manager, which is a whole chapter in itself. I disabled it because it kept interfering with my signing onto the internet. Here's the terminal in super user mode. The Wacom Tablet Finder again, Xterm, another terminal, and YAST again. So there's a lot of duplication. Under Utilities, again you have ARC, the Archive Manager, Kate, which is a text editor, KCalc, which is a little calculator, KCharacter Select, KColor Chooser, KGPG, Cleopatra, KMag, KMouseTool, Knotes. By the way, on Knotes I haven't used it, but it just suddenly popped out of nowhere once. So you have to be careful. Things can appear and disappear when you least expect it. compare, KRuler, KTNF again, Qt4 settings again, Spectacle again, Wacom Tablet Finder again. Under Power and Session, you have Lock, Logout, Switch User, Suspend, Hibernate, Reboot, and Shutdown. Now let's go back to the settings again. As I said, Configure Desktop gives you the settings for the KDE Plasma 5 desktop. I'm not going to go through all these. Under Appearance, you have Workspace Theme, Look and Feel, Desktop Theme, Cursor Theme, Splash Screen. I fiddled with this a little bit. It's not exactly as it came. I kept the OpenSUSE Look and Feel. Under the desktop theme, I went to OpenSUSE Dark, and that gave me these dark panels here. I didn't change the cursor theme or the splash screen. Under desktop behavior, this is where you're going to find a lot of things, especially under desktop effects. There's a whole long list of effects. And I've disabled many that were enabled. The only ones I've left enabled are Zoom, which I use to zoom in and out, and you click on the Meta key or Windows key, and if you click on the equal or plus key, you zoom in, and if you click on the underline or minus key, you zoom out. And then down here at the bottom, I've enabled Desktop Grid and Present Windows. You can show the desktop grid with Control F8. And then I also have the screen edge enabled so that when I go to the right screen edge, it shows the desktop grid. You notice I have Simple Screen Recorder minimized here, and the reason I enabled Present Windows is that the desktop grid will then show the minimized windows in addition to the unminimized windows. When I use this, I want to see all of them. So those are the only two things I have enabled there. If you want desktop cube animation, if you want wobbly windows, if you want all those things, you can get them. Now under Screen Edge here, this isn't working as well as it used to because it doesn't show the ones which are actually enabled. They're usually highlighted. In this case, they're not. But I've enabled this one here, and you can see I've enabled Desktop Grid. The rest I've disabled. Under Virtual Desktops, I changed the number of desktops to 4. It was 2 by default. Now going back to all settings, I want to point out one more thing. As KDE Plasma comes, there's a lot of animations and things that really slow down the system. And you can adjust those to some extent. If you go to Display and Monitor, and then go to Compositor, Animation Speed, you notice I've turned it down to Instant. You can go all the way to very slow, which is great if you have nothing else to do. But Instant suits me just fine. I got rid of a lot of animations by doing this. So those are just a few of the settings. The other one, of course, I usually go to immediately is the power settings, and I turn off all the power saving features. But I won't go into the details. Again, I've done it so often. Now, I haven't installed any printers yet, but I know from past experience with KDE Plasma 5.12 and with OpenSUSE that it works with all of my printers and it works with all of my scanners. So now if we go back to settings and we go to the bottom, you find YAST, which are the OpenSUSE settings. and you have to enter your password to get into that. Under software, you can get add-on products. I found that this was a kind of a hodgepodge of products that I really didn't want, but you may want some of them. You can change your software repositories quite simply. This shows you what's enabled and what's not. Notice that I now also have the Pac-Man repository, which is where a lot of these multimedia codecs come into play. So that's that. This is the online update, and you may want to run that once in a while if it doesn't automatically alert you. And software management is the YAST software manager. As I mentioned, I was able to install Kdenlive from here, but while it is listed in Discover, it didn't install properly for Discover. If I look for LibreCAD, and then click on Search, it's found almost immediately. I'm not going to install it now, but it's available. So that's the YAST software manager. Then there's a hardware configuration tools, system configuration tools, and there are a lot of them here. And there are a lot of network services which I don't use, but anybody who worked in a network or with networks would find these essential. Then there are security tools and support such as the release notes and miscellaneous. Snapper is a way of snapping back your system to a former version, and that only works when you're using the Btrfs file system, and I don't use it. So that's the YAST control center. Now, I just want to go to Discover briefly, and you'll find that under System. This works better than it used to if you click on Applications. The one thing that's still a bit unusual about it is you get a lot of applications which are not appropriate to the installed system. In other words, GNOME Tweaks is appropriate for GNOME. It has nothing whatsoever to do with the KDE Plasma desktop. So you have to use this judiciously. If I look for LibreCAD here, press enter, there it is right away. If I click on it, I get this page which describes it, shows the version number, the size, the source, etc. I'm not going to install it now, however. Now, if you just want to browse, these are all applications, but I can click on particular ones, like, for instance, graphics. And there's Simple Scan, GIMP, Blender, Inkscape, Darktable, Krita Ocular, Peak, Digicam, OpenSCAD. That's a solid 3D CAD modeler. I've never tried that. GwenView. Now you notice it says remove by some of these. For instance, under GwenView it says remove. That means it's installed. You have the Eye of Mate, which is an image viewer. So that's Discover. It works, but as I found out, not well in some cases. So you can try using Discover to install software, but if it doesn't work, you always have YAST or the terminal to fall back on. Now, the reason I left this OpenSUSE page as one of my home pages, it has a lot of useful information. The most useful thing to me is the Get Software link. Now, you can get this on the internet itself, but this is just a quick way to do it. You can search for packages. As I mentioned, I installed MuseScore this way, so it wasn't in the repositories. And you see I have several different versions here. If I click on Get, I have several versions. I have the versions for Tumbleweed, for OpenSUSE Leap 15, and for OpenSUSE Leap 42.3. I can show the experimental packages or the community packages. Normally, I would prefer the community packages, but in case there are no community packages, I would use the experimental packages. And then notice that I have two versions available. I have version 3.0, which is from the Git repository. And I have two sources for version 2.1. So I did already install this. I'm not going to do it again. Now, the other reason it's good to keep this OpenSUSE search page available is that you can go to their website, to their wiki, to their build service. Of course, I was just there at the website. There are a number of things listed in the release notes that I won't go over here. Advantages of Leap 15 over some of the earlier versions. One is easier migration to SUSE Linux Enterprise for developers and people with an interest in SUSE Linux Enterprise, of course. That's nice. They can develop applications with OpenSUSE Leap and port those over to SUSE Linux Enterprise with little difficulty. This distribution also supports a large number of development tools and a large number of coding languages. If you're interested in those things, I suggest looking at the release notes. Otherwise, this has been a brief look at OpenSUSE Leap 15 with the KDE Plasma desktop. This is XRAM Tech. Thanks for watching.